joined our session today. So, Aijaz Ahmad Memorial Study Circle is a progressive democratic students group run by students of South Asian University, New Delhi. We conduct bi-monthly reading sessions and also lectures on various themes. Since our university has not started physical sessions yet, we are doing our work online for last 2 months. Today, we are happy to host this session on seeking Aijaz Ahmad in times of growing threat of fascist authoritarianism. And we are very lucky to have Comrade Subhashini Ali as our speaker today. As all of you know, Comrade Subhashini Ali is the member of PolitBuro of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, and she has been a member of the parliament and also the president of All India Democratic Women's Association. Before going into our session, I would like to briefly talk about Aijaz Ahmad and his intellectual legacy and his biography. Aijaz Ahmad was born in 1941 in Uttar Pradesh in a prosperous landed family, from where he moved into Pakistan in the time of partition. He is a Marxist literary
Actually,
critic
actually,
and
he went much after partition. He was about, he was born in 41, but he went after partition when he was about 12 years old.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, he
Yeah.
he went after. Yeah, I was saying in times of the partition. Yes, you are right. So he's a Marxist literary critic and a theoretician and a teacher and a guide to all of us. And I would like to quote Geeta Hariharan from one of the memorial meetings of Aijaz Ahmad, which was conducted by the leftward Tricontinental and Newsclick. Geeta Hariharan says that it is not far-fetching to say a line by Marx, which was actually the title of a series of conversations conducted by Vijay Prashad with Aijaz Ahmad to capture the life and work of Aijaz Ahmad. And the line is, as most of you must be familiar, nothing human is alien to me. Geeta Hariharan says that it actually shows the depth of the work that Aijaz Ahmad have done. Aijaz Ahmad have worked on expansive topics. He critiqued postmodernist tendencies in academia and examined imperialism, nationalism, and he wrote of Hindutva and the wave of Islamism. I think it is very important for us to remember today the 1993 article by Aijaz Ahmad, which is titled Culture, Community, Nations, and on the Ruins of Ayodhya, in which he says that the communal violence in India was uh, more cumulatively widespread after the 3 months of the destruction of Babri Masjid than since at any point after the partition. I think this should be read along with uh, the uh, the violence and genocide perpetrated by the Hindutva forces to the Muslim community in India. I would also like to quote Aijaz Ahmad from the introduction of his collection of essays titled Lineages of the Present from the year 2000, in which he observed very prophetically and with precision that the struggle in contemporary India is not merely between universalism and a politics of identity, or between communalism and secularism as abstract cultural values, but more specifically between socialism and fascistoid projects of far right. And he then goes on to declare that the only countering force to fascistic communalism is a community, a nation that is built on radical equality. And he says that the antidote to fascism, the only antidote to fascism is communism. So, living through this grim times of bulldozer politics, we believe that we desperately need to cling on to the intellectual legacy of Aijaz Ahmad. We are very happy to have Comrade Subhashini Ali to speak on this topic today. So over to you, Comrade.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very privileged to have been invited by all of you to this session. I think it's one of the first sort of talks you have had after Comrade Aijaz's passing away. You may have been doing reading, I don't know, you maybe have had some reading sessions, but perhaps this is the first talk that you have organized. And so I'm quite intimidated also because Comrade Aijaz was a very towering intellectual personality. And if you go through the his writings and the depth that of his analysis and the way in which he was in a very sharp and impressive and at the same time very grounded in not only Marxism but a wide knowledge of a wide range of subjects. So everything that he wrote had this amazing quality of a depth, of sharpness, of being very unrelenting in its criticism, but also so grounded in such deep knowledge and analysis. So it's very difficult to speak about him without feeling very, very intimidated. So the two things that I would like to say uh, in sort of as an introduction to what I'm going to say is number one is that Comrade Aijaz, of course, wrote on a wide range of subjects. He was deeply interested in literature. At one time, he had wanted to become an Urdu writer. And in fact, most of his early writing for uh, more than 20 years of his life was in Urdu. And he was very important for the communist movement worldwide, actually. And now I see that he has been given that kind of recognition in many countries. And that is, he was a formidable fighter for Marxism at a time when Marxism was under severe intellectual attack from those who claimed to be Marxists, actually, or those who claimed to be reinterpreting and reformulating Marxism for some kind of a changed time. And so his contribution, when all the different kinds of posts were gaining a lot of credence, that is post-modernism, post-colonialism, post this and post that, and the whole school of history that was being formulated within our own country in opposition to Marxist understanding. He was an indefatigable fighter for Marxism against all these various, what he very plainly called distortions. He actually saw them as being attacks on Marxism, trying to be more Marxist than the Marxists or trying to be left of the Marxists. But ultimately, as he had predicted, most of the proponents of these post theories have actually abandoned any pretense of being Marxist, and many of them have actually become right wingers as well. And his unrelenting battle against big names, he was not intimidated by anybody. It has been extremely important for all of us to clarify our own thoughts and to make our own intellectual battles much easier because we had someone like Comrade Ejaz fighting for us. I'd also like to say that he had the intellectual temerity and the intellectual confidence to take on Edward's side also. He liked him, admired him, but he disagreed with him and his whole idea of Orientalism, etc. And he saw Orientalism as something that could lead to uh, non progressive understanding and non progressive intellectual movements. And he had the, well, I won't call it courage because it was a courage based on his confidence, but he had that confidence and courage to take on somebody like Edward Said also. So, as I said, uh, all of us who are students of Marxism and trying to uh, adopt Marxist thinking and Marxist theory to praxis and to our own movements and to our own participation in movements, he has actually cleared the way for us. A lot of the battles we would have had to fight, a lot of the work we would have had to do, actually, Comrade Aijaz did for us. And it is for us to read what he wrote, to understand what he wrote, and to try to take it forward in this field. And secondly, because he was living in India from 1980 onwards, he took a tremendous amount of very serious interest in various kinds of developments and political developments in India. And while he remained very international in his outlook, very much in touch with all international intellectual currents, especially of the left, he uh, brought tremendous powers of concentration and analysis to the Indian political developments that were taking place before his eyes. And he actually was very prescient in what he had to say about the development of what was the right wing in India at that time, and which is, of course, now appearing more and more every day to be a kind of a full blown fascistic authoritarianism. And we have to admire the fact that he, just a few weeks after the Babri Masjid demolition, he had given a talk in Kolkata. And in that talk, actually, he described this demolition as one of, as a display, as an event that brought together many features of uh, of fascistic uh, politics. And he talked about the way in which fascists in other countries also have organized these very, very dramatic events which have involved millions of people and have possibly changed the way millions of people have been thinking. And he was very, very prescient, as I said, to see that this demolition of the Babri Masjid was one such event. And it was actually a very crucial point at which Indian politics took a very different turn. Even though after that, as we know, uh, the BJP was defeated in many state elections. It was defeated at the center by the Congress party, etc., etc. But what Comrade Aijaz said was absolutely correct. That day of the demolition was a turning point in our political history, and it was a moment at which the right wing forces, the Hindutva forces, assumed an importance much greater than they had had previously, and they were able to capture the imagination of millions in our country, and they were also able to centralize what was the main what was the main sort of direction in which they wanted to take the country. And here I would just like to mention a few of the points that he raised at that time. Of course, we know that when he went to Kolkata and spoke after the demolition, he at that time was trying to read as much as he could that would be relevant to understand and make sense of what was happening in India. And it was very natural for him to turn to Gramsci, because, of course, Gramsci was the great Marxist uh, intellectual, the towering, I would say, Marxist giant who, while being imprisoned in a fascist jail, was able to write so lucidly and with such force about how fascism develops, what are the roots of fascism, and also to locate fascism in his own society and in political developments of his own society. So, after the demolition, in his talk in Kolkata, Comrade Aijaz also spoke a lot about what Gramsci had said. He quoted Gramsci at length, and he had always defended Gramsci earlier also against the subalterns and against all those post colonialists and post Marxists and post modernists that I spoke about. But Gramsci took on a new meaning and a new resonance for him after the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992. And what he did is what we should all be thinking about and appreciating and wanting to learn for. Because if you read what he's written after that, if you read what he wrote in that lecture that was referred to a little while ago, which was delivered in Hyderabad in 1993, if you read his subsequent articles, which were published as three essays, and after that, if you read 2016, what he wrote, which the EMS Smriti Foundation has brought out, and the name of that lecture is India, Liberal Democracy and the Extreme Right. So, what you will find is that he does not at all repeat what he has said in 1992. He is uh, intelligent and Marxist enough to say that yes, what I said in 1992 gave certain pointers in the correct direction, but I was relying too much on Gramsci's analysis of the Italian situation, the Italian roots of Italian fascism, and it has become necessary ever since then to, in fact, reject many of the things that I said, yani Aijaz Ahmad said in 1992, and to try and understand more and more deeply, more and more uh, analytically, what is the Indian version of fascism going to look like? Because he said, he said, I'm saying in jest, that Gramsci said that each society gets its own kind of fascism, gets the fascism that it deserves, is what he said. So it means that in each country and in each society and at each time, at each different stage of history, the way in which fascistic forces develop and come to power are different in each case. And if we do not understand these differences, if we do not try to study their roots in our own societies, then we will also not be able to understand how to fight these extreme right wing forces in our own country and in our own society. So I think this is the as far as we are concerned in India today, when, of course, the biggest challenge before us is the tremendous growth of the Hindutva forces, the amount of space that they now occupy, political, cultural space that they now occupy, and the fact, and this is a point that Comrade Aijaz referred to several times, that when we talk about Hindutva, we should be looking not at the BJP, but we should be looking at the RSS. It is only if we try to understand what the RSS is all about and what the motivation of the RSS is and what its objective is. If we try to understand that, only then will we be able to come to grips with what is happening in our country and also try to challenge it. And here he says something which I'm going to quote from that article that I referred to on liberal democracy. And he says the RSS was founded 90 years ago in 1925 on an uncannily Gramscian principle that enduring political power can arise only on the basis of a prior cultural transformation and consent. And this broad based cultural consent to the extreme right's doctrines can only be built through a long historical process from the bottom up. What follows from this ideological articulation of the long term strategy is that if the RSS succeeds in constituting a certain sort of social subjectivity for the great majority of Hindus in India, who are said to constitute some 80% of the Indian population, and if they can all be unified positively in pursuit of a civilizational mission and negatively in permanent opposition to a fancied enemy, Muslim and Christian minorities, as the Nazis sought to unite the German nation against the Jews, then the demographic majority can be turned into a permanent political majority. So, this is, I think, a very, very important uh, point that Comrade uh, Aijaz Ahmad has made. And if we look at the history of the development of the RSS, we see, however much we may dislike or disagree with their formulations and with their motivation and with their ultimate objective, but we have to learn or we have to study the way in which they have worked for the last 90 years to come to where they are today. And where they are today, I'm not talking in terms of how many seats the BJP has won, how many states it controls. That's, of course, important. But the extent to which they have been able to ensure that a very large section of the majority community consents to their understanding, consents to their objective, feels that what they are saying is correct, that what they want to achieve is also correct. Now, unless we understand how they've done this, it's going to be very difficult for us to also challenge them. And I don't want to take more time than I have been allotted. So I'll just make a few brief points. And that is, we all know that the RSS is committed to what they call is a Hindu Rashtra. But very often we don't go into all the various aspects of what this Hindu Rashtra will be in its in its full form. We look at two or three aspects. So we say in the Hindu Rashtra, many Indian citizens will not be equal citizens. The minorities will not be equal citizens because, as Savarkar said in his explanation of Hindutva, only those can be considered to be true Indians for whom India is the Punya Bhumi and also the Janma Bhumi. That means that those minorities who have their religious places outside of India, like Muslims, like Christians, they can never be equal citizens. So this was one point that he made, and this is one aspect, naturally a very important aspect of the Hindu Rashtra. The second very important aspect is that what the RSS has been doing has been very much intense. I mean, they got a boost. The RSS has always been very pro both imperialism and pro capitalism. They have been pro laissez-faire. They are allergic to the word socialism, so on and so forth. So naturally, the new liberal policies and the beginning of the new liberal era and its development has given them a tremendous boost, because this is something that they have been committed to from their very inception. Various other parties have talked about Indian kind of socialism, mixed economy, etc., etc. But from its very inception, the RSS has been committed to laissez-faire economics, to the capitalist system without any checks and balances. And it has also been very pro imperialism. If you remember, RSS in very early days during the Cold War was always in favor of close ties with the US, even in favor of joining CENTO, like Pakistan did. And one of the major criticisms of the left and even of the Congress party was this non alignment and their commitment to not being part of the CENTO and various other imperialist alliances. So when the new liberal reforms started and that new era started, of course, we have to see, and it's very interesting, the parallel development. That means we say new liberal reform started around 1991 with Narasimha Rao's first term as Prime Minister, with Manmohan Singh as his Finance Minister, with the so-called opening up of the markets and so on and so forth. So around 1991 is the date that we normally set in India for the uh, inception of the period of neoliberal reforms. And now this is exactly the period when the RSS project also takes a great jump. I mean, the demolition of the mosques occurs in 1992, in December 1992. So obviously, their growth got a big boost from the adoption of the neoliberal uh, project in India, and uh, their espousal of it brought them a lot of support from different elements of the capitalist class. The RSS and the BJP had always attracted a large section of Indian capitalists, Indian industrialists, and what Ajaz refers to as the Banya element. That is not the really advanced uh, industrial bourgeoisie, capitalist bourgeoisie, but the smaller players. The BJP and the RSS had always attracted their support and their financial support from its very birth. But with the neoliberal era, they were able to garner more and more support from the entire capitalist class. So, this is one very important aspect, both of their policy and their what they want to achieve, a completely full-blown capitalist system with no checks and balances, sort of laissez-faire of the old kind, which we don't even know can ever. But certainly, the neoliberal project is very much part of uh, their where they want to take India. And so that era was able to see their tremendous growth, including the destruction of the mosque in Ayodhya. The second part of their project is, of course, to change the very nature of Indian society. And I think that this is something that Ajaz points to in many of his uh, essays, many of his writings. He doesn't put it all together in one place, but he refers to this again and again. And so I think this is what we all have to study very seriously. When he talks about their intention to change the nature of Indian society, then there are two things that he talks about. One is he stresses, and I think that all of you must have read this in your recent readings if you've been carrying out group readings, I don't know, is that he says that what the RSS and the BJP have been able to achieve that no one else has been able to achieve is to use existing constitutional structures to further their own agenda, which is actually destructive of these structures. So, when we talk about liberal democracy and liberal democratic structures in India, we do understand that after our constitution was passed and various democratic structures were created, were strengthened over the last 40, 50 years, this also gave them a great legitimacy in the eyes of the Indian people. So, if you have these democratic constitutional structures which have quite a widespread legitimacy, among the people of India, then how do you carry out a project which is inimical to the existence of these structures, which actually is going to uh, transform these structures into something completely different? Now, this is a challenge before the left also, because the left also talks about destroying the state structures, destroying these structures, replacing them with a different kind of a state, with a different kind of a polity, with a completely different kind of way of running the government and uh, organizing the state. So what Aijaz says, which is very important, is because these constitutional structures do have legitimacy, people are attached to them. What the RSS has done and the BJP has done is something which is quite amazing, and that is to retain the structures themselves. They are not destroying the structures. They're not talking about destroying the constitution, destroying constitutional procedures, destroying elections, the electoral system. They're not talking about any of these things. What they are doing, though, is to use those structures, to take over those structures, and actually change them from within, but without destroying them, maintaining not just a facade, but some of the spirit of those structures also. They are proving that they are quite successful in maintaining the, what should I say, the physical structures themselves, but completely changing their nature. And in that way, changing the nature of Indian society itself. So I think this is a very important point that we have to think about. And what he says at the end of that lecture that I'm quoting from, brought out by the EMS Smriti, he says, as long as the working class is unable to overthrow this right wing offensive, and also because more and more of the so called secular democratic parties are actually moving towards the right, are moving uh, towards the pole that is being created in Indian politics by the BJP and the RSS. More and more of the so-called secular, liberal, democratic forces are moving towards this pole. So, because there is no huge opposition to what they are doing, they are actually able to successfully, as Ajaz puts it, maybe I can find his quote without wasting too much time. Um, so anyway, you can read his article. It's there in many parts of it. What he's basically saying is, because there is no great opposition to what they are doing, this kind of transforming from inside all these institutions without demolishing them, so they can continue in this way. They may not have to actually demolish them. They may not have to actually do away with parliamentary democracy, with the electoral system, with various aspects of constitutional democracy. They may not have to do it. And he makes a very interesting comment at the end of that article, that only if there is a huge challenge from the left, from the working class, and from the forces of socialism, only that would compel them, that would force them to reveal their true uh, nature and force them to actually demolish these institutions. So now what we learn from this, what we take away from this is it's complicated. It is, you know, it's not easy to immediately define, but it's very important, because he is again saying that what's happening in India is different from what happened in Germany. It's different from what happened in Italy. In Germany, the entire capitalist class swung towards the Nazis because of the threat from the left. The left was a huge force. The trade unions controlled by the left were a huge force. They were able to actually uh, they were organized huge resistance to the Nazi government. And that was so fearsome for the capitalist class that pushed the capitalist class to completely support the Nazis. And they were able to then manufacture their social consensus after they had actually, destroyed the trade unions, destroyed the left, and then turned their attention to demonizing the Jews. So he said that was the different situation and a different challenge that fascism was facing in Nazi Germany. In India, it's not facing that kind of challenge. Today, in the whole world, there's a rightward shift. In the whole world, many of the elements that we associate with fascism have found acceptance by mainstream bourgeois parties in much of the advanced world, etc., etc. So here he said there is this possibility that, in fact, they will be able to attain most of their objective utilizing existing democratic constitutional structures. So this is something obviously that we have to take up as a challenge in explaining to people that yes, maybe the structures are there, but what is being done using those structures is completely different. And now I'll come to the third aspect of what I think Comrade Aijaz is telling us about the nature of the fascist authoritarian forces in our country, and that is their social roots. And here I think this is very important because what he says is that there has not been enough analysis of Indian nationalism from the left. He said Comrade EMS in his work on Gandhi had started that process, but it needs to be taken much further. Most of us have been content to think of this Indian nationalism as being basically secular, basically forward-looking, basically having many progressive features. But we forget that within the national movement itself, there was much regressive thought. And in fact, long before the RSS was born, if we look at the sort of uh, extreme wing of Indian nationalism, that was what was known as the militant wing, we will find that it was also very reactionary in many of its uh, formulations or many of its aspirations. While they talked about getting rid of the British, but what did they want to bring in its place? Many of them, and I think Tilak is one very big example, but even many of the people who were writing in Bengal, for example, they were in fact harking back to some golden age of ancient India, ancient Hindu India. And what that golden age was, we all know. It was a very casteist, exploitative society which was being projected and thought about as a great golden age to which a return was being imagined. And that is why we find that many of these leaders, they had extremely regressive ideas about caste. They were very much in favor of the caste system. And about women, they were supporters of child marriage. Because all this child marriage, sati, etc., etc., this was also part of the glorious past that they wanted to go back to. And part of their opposition to the British government was the fact that the British government was trying to reform these aspects. So, what Comrade Aijaz is saying, I think is extremely important for us to understand, is that a lot of the fertile ground for the right wing forces to grow and develop in our country has been provided by the national movement itself. And so, an analysis of that national movement is also necessary, a much more deep and much more serious analysis of all its various aspects is also necessary to understand how this form of right wing authoritarianism, which we think of as something new associated with the rise of the BJP, it's not something new. It has roots in uh, the soil provided by the Indian national movement itself. And he gives a very interesting example here. And after this, I think I'm going to start going towards summing up. The example he gives is that one of the things that many people associated with the national movement glorified, and which, of course, the RSS picked up and continued to do, was Peshwa Raj. And Comrade Aijaz refers to it as the rule of the descendants of Shivaji. Actually, that's not entirely true. Shivaji's descendants in the next generation itself were removed from Pune and the seat of power to Kolhapur and Kagal, etc. And the Peshwas took over. That means they were like the prime ministers, and they were Chitpavan Brahmins, and they took over the seat of power in Pune. And if you go through Peshwai laws and Peshwai policy, so then you will understand what Hindu Rashtra is. That is the blueprint for Hindu Rashtra. Strict adherence to one ashram dharma. I mean, strict to the point that you can't even imagine, and so on and so forth. And this was a past, actually, it was not even a past as far as Tilak and all were concerned. But I'll give you an example here right now that Chhatrapati Shahuji Maharaj, who was actually the descendant of Shivaji, they had been, as I told you, shifted out. He was from Kagal and then he became the ruler of Kolhapur. And in the beginning, Tilak was, supporter of the Kolhapur Raja because Shivaji is descendant. But then Shahuji Maharaj did three things. He reserved all jobs in his state government, 50% of all jobs for Shudras, that means OBCs. He also made intercaste and intercommunal marriages legal. This is way back in 1902 and 1903. And he also made education first free and compulsory for Dalits and then for everyone. And to make sure that that education became available, he vastly enlarged the number of schools. Now, Tilak reacted to these actions by Shahuji Maharaj, saying, he's gone mad. This is insanity. What is he doing? So what I'm trying to say is that Tilak was very important in the national movement of our country. And here's a leader of the Garam Dal, the great Swaraj, is saying that reserving jobs for Shudras, that is OBCs, making education free and universal for everyone, including Dalits, and also making inter-community and inter-caste marriages legal. So this is madness, and he was totally in opposition to it. So what Comrade Aijaz says, I think, is very important for us to realize that the roots of the Indian fascistic movement, that is the RSS, is in all of these things. It gains sustenance from the support of the capitalist class, which of course now has completely solidified by Narendra Modi. It gains some sustenance from the fact that it is able to make its understanding of history accepted by very, very large numbers of people. And it's very interesting. We always feel that the fact that they were not part of the national movement is something which will ultimately go against them. But they have actually changed the understanding of who the rulers were that we need to fight against by shifting the focus from the British to the Mughals. What they have done is they have convinced a lot of people that fighting the British was not so important. It's fighting the pernicious effects and results of Mughal rule that is much more important And that is the real movement for liberation. They've succeeded in doing that to some extent, certainly in North India. So, what they have been able to do is they have been able to uh, make this opposition to the minorities a sort of a part of the new nationalism. This is part of the new nationalism to fight the minorities, to fight their legacy, to fight the legacy of their rulers, to try and obliterate that legacy is now the big national project that they have been able to convince many people uh, of its legitimacy. And the third thing is their social project. And I think that this could prove to be the Achilles heel of the RSS Hindutva project. Because their social project is actually not acceptable and certainly extremely harmful to the vast majority of Hindu society. Their social project, which actually they announced way back in 1950, when they said we don't accept the uh, constitution of Dr. Ambedkar, we want to replace it with the Manusmriti. They said so in so many words. That is something that I feel, and there are others who feel like this, can prove to be their Achilles heel, because that is not a project they have abandoned. You see, even when they talk about, say, Ghar Vapsi of Muslims, that those who converted from Hindu to Muslim should come back to being Hindu. So when they were asked, okay, if I want to come back, where do I come back? What kind of Hindu will I become if I decide to come back to my old home? They made it very clear you will have to come back to the community or the caste from which you converted. Yeah. You can convert as far as your religion is concerned, but you cannot convert your caste. Your caste will remain the same as it was even 200 years ago or 300 years ago if you decide to come back. That is how immutable caste is for the RSS. I think this is a very important point to think about. This is the immutability of caste. It is something that you are born into, you cannot get rid of, and your occupation also will be decided by your caste. And this is why I feel, and Comrade Aijaz refers to this in many parts, in many of his writings, that their commitment to the caste system, to the Varnashram Dharma, is also a very big part of their agenda. The, their understanding of what Hindu Rashtra is includes this, that Hindu Rashtra, the social uh, uh, the social organization of the Hindu Rashtra will be Varn Ashram Dharma. And I think that this point is not emphasized enough in much of our propaganda, in much of our public campaigns. We talk about the neoliberal agenda of the Sangh Parivar. We talk about the way in which they're using communal polarization to create a, a consensus and a kind of a tent under which Hindu community can collect and unite behind them. We talk about all these things and we speak effectively about all these things. And a lot of what we say is accepted and makes sense to people. But I feel we also need to speak about their social project, that what kind of society will the Hindu Rashtra be? What will be the uh, social formation that it will promote? And it is very clear that the social formation that it will promote is that of Varnashram Dharma, that of the caste system. That caste system will remain central to the Hindu Rashtra that they want to impose on our society. And here I would now conclude by saying we go back to Ayodhya. What Comrade Aijaz said was that the demolition of the Babri Masjid was certainly a huge event which exposed much about the Sangh project, the project of Hindu Rashtra, their motivation and their ultimate objection. Much of that was revealed on the 6th of December 1992. And now I'd like to end by saying that now we have to see what happened on the 5th of August 2020. On the 5th of August 2020, the foundation stone of the Ram temple was laid after the Supreme Court judgment. And you all know that the Prime Minister of India and the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh were both present there. Certainly, this was in violation of the constitutional understanding of secularism and how those who are constitutional heads of state governments, how they are expected to behave. This was a complete violation of that. And there were, I think, 5 people present there. They were all males. There was no female there. And so all this tells us about their understanding of what the social uh, form of Hindu Rashtra, what social form it will take. But what is very important is something that has not been publicized, not been talked about as much as it should, is that Mohan Bhagwat was also present there, the head of the RSS. He was also present there. And he made a very short speech. But in his short speech, he quoted only one shloka in Sanskrit. And that shloka was from the Manusmriti. And that shloka, I'm just giving you a translation. I can't read the Sanskrit shloka. He says, this is what a firstborn in that country, that is Aryavrat, is saying. Firstborn meaning Brahmin. So this is what a Brahmin of this nation is saying. Let all men learn their respective duties from a firstborn. Shall I say it again? Let all men on earth learn their respective duties from a firstborn, that is a Brahmin born in that country. So, what is he saying actually? He is saying that today we are uh, placing this foundation stone of this temple, and what we are also doing is we are laying the foundation of a new kind of a society in which people will follow the precepts of the Brahmins, the firstborn, and what they do, that means their occupation, will be decided according to what they say, according to what the Brahmins say. And then there are very important shlokas just before this one. I'm not going into the details. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to understand that that day, 5th of August, not only was the foundation stone of the Ram temple placed, but in fact, perhaps the foundation of the Hindu Rashtra was also placed. And we were told in no uncertain terms what that Hindu Rashtra will be all about by Mohan Bhagwat, who said, let all those born in this country follow the precepts of the firstborn as far as their occupations are concerned. It means what they do, what work they do, what profession they enter. For all this, they must be guided by the firstborn, that is the Brahmins. So I feel that I have, of course, gone away from what Comrade Aijaz has written. And I think that I may have taken liberties with what he was trying to say. Maybe I have not correctly interpreted what he was saying. But I think there are enough pointers in many of his articles in which he talks about the primacy of caste in India. Even in that last interview that has been published as Nothing Human is Alien to Me, the long interview with Vijay Prashad, published by Leftward, he says that when I came to India from Pakistan via America, what hit me was the primacy of caste in this country. And he gives very interesting examples. We can end on a lighter note. He said, when people meet in India, they don't hug each other as they do in an Islamic country, as they do in things. They keep a distance. You can always see that distance. Nobody will drink water from the glass of another person, even if that person is a friend. Maybe among you students now it's changing, I don't know. But definitely when you go home, all of us have been told by our parents, I think it's sometime or the other, that, don't eat from somebody else's plate, don't drink water from somebody else. What he says is caste and this concept of caste purity and primacy of caste is deeply, deeply, deeply interred in the Indian DNA. So I think if we extrapolate from that, from this understanding of caste, from the fact that he talks about the way in which the Peshwai was referred to by a section of the Indian national movement, it was glorified by them. And of course, that same Peshwai is very much glorified by the RSS. Why are they so angry with celebration of Bhima Koregaon? I mean, I found very little explanation of this. They cannot tolerate the fact that Bhima Koregaon is celebrated by lakhs of Dalits every year. Why? Because Bhima Koregaon was the battle in which the Peshwa army was defeated by the British army, and apparently that British army had a very, very large number of Mahars, and it was the Mahars who fought against the Peshwa and defeated that Peshwa army. For them, this is a crime. This is an anti-national crime for the RSS. And perhaps that is why they have reacted so viciously and so violently against all those whom they accuse of having been involved with the Bhima Koregaon celebrations. So once again, I'm moving away from Comrade Aijaz. Maybe I'm even moving in a direction that he would not have taken. But what is important is to first read what he says and then to move forward in directions that he has given us. And so I'll end with a small quotation in which he says, I am a kind of Marxist who does believe that Marxism is an unfinished science. We have to take into account all the new developments, but from a Marxist position, from within the absolute iron frame of Marxist thought. So I think I will leave you with that. And I hope that the only thing that I wanted to do through this talk was to encourage all of you to read Comrade Aijaz more closely, more seriously, and take directions from him as to how we should proceed to study what is going on in our society, to study what is happening here, and how we combat it, how we face this enormous challenge that is there staring us in the face. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade
Okay,
Subhashini Ali.
I'm just going to leave you for a minute. I have to get my charger because my battery is going on. Are we going to stay on now for some more questions and things, or
Yeah, yeah. Can we take some more questions? It would be great if we
do I
can
need
take
to
some
get my
questions from the
charger?
audience.
Do I need to get my charger and charge my
Yeah,
laptop?
yeah. You can take your time and take the
No,
charger,
I'm not
and
going to
we'll.
take my time. You can start looking about your questions and I'll come back.
Okay, so the session is open to questions now. We will wait for uh, Comrade Subhashini Ali to join us to take the questions. So,
बिजू जरा मेरी मदद करो जल्दी से मेरा हाँ इसका चार्जर मुझे लगाना मीटिंग भी चल रही है ना
so for those who have questions, you can either type it in the chat box, or we can ask. You can unmute yourself and ask it one by one. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Is
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
good at your end? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, first of all, thank you so much for walking us through Aijaz Ahmad's work and moving beyond that to make sense of the history and present of Indian fascism. And thank you so much. So, we would now take questions. So, shall we take questions one by one?
Whatever you like.
Yeah, okay. So then we will take questions one by one. So those who have questions can unmute yourself and ask. And if you are not comfortable with speaking, you can put it in the chat box so that we can read it out.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, Pan.
Yeah, so, ma'am, uh, we see that even Anand Tumre has written about the Hindutvaization of
I
Dalits.
can't understand what you're saying actually.
Can you hear me?
Uh, you are audible. Am I audible? So I think I can repeat the question for you, comrade. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So, my question is that the phenomena that has culminated now, which
Hello?
started.
Hello. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Can
Okay,
you hear me,
Parnell, go
ma'am?
I
ahead.
couldn't hear your question, Parnil.
Yeah, yeah. I'm saying, ma'am, what I'm saying is that
Is,
we've been
is
witnessing. Can you hear now, ma'am?
Anamika, can we all be heard now? Hello?
Can you?
Pernil, yeah, Pernil, if you are not audible to Comrade Subhashini Ali, could you please put it in the chat box? Put the question in the chat box.
Can I ask the question and you can, convey the
Anamika?
question?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So my question is,
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Can we be heard?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Can you hear Pernil speaking?
can you hear me, ma'am? Can you hear me, ma'am? Can you hear
Pernil,
me?
I
Parnil Yodha, can you uh, repeat your question, please?
Yes, ma'am. My question is, we've been
I can't
witnessing
hear
this.
you.
okay. So Pernil, can you please put the question in the chat box?
I'll just quickly say the question and you can
Anamika?
convey. Is that fine?
Anamika?
Yeah, yeah,
You can
yeah.
tell her.
Yes.
You can tell her. I'll just tell you the question. You can tell her. So
I
we've
think
been
Okay,
there's
okay,
something
fine.
witnessing.
wrong with this connection now.
Okay, so I will
We
repeat
Yeah,
Pernil's question
there's
for you.
something
Is
wrong with
that
the
fine?
connection now, I think.
Am I audible to you?
I can
Could you please
see
could you
all of
please
you.
try uh, are you connected with an earphone or something? Could you please
Can you put question? Anamika, can you hear me?
yes, yes, we can hear you.
Viju! Viju!
Hello, am I audible now?
Comrade Subhashini had some network glitches, so she will rejoin again if that's fine. I think that's fine.
Yeah, please stay back. We will take questions. We are trying to resolve the issue. Hello, am I audible now? You are on mute, comrade.
Okay. Now can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Am I
Okay.
audible to you? Can you
Yeah,
hear
I
us?
saw some of the questions in the chat box. It's about
Okay, okay.
women
So,
joining the Mahasammelans and all that.
yeah, should I read the shall I read questions one by one for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, okay. Before that, Pernil, you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, okay.
So
Please
my
go ahead.
question is that we've been witnessing this phenomena called the Hindutvaization of Dalits, and Anand Tumre has also written about that in his book. Do you
Who
think
has written about it?
Anand Tumre?
Anand Teltumbde. Yeah.
Yes, he's also written about it in his book, and he says that it started since the 1990s, and we also see today, Narendra Modi declaring 14th April to be a holiday, and this thing conferring Bharat Ratna and all whatever, wearing blue, appealing to
No, he
Dalits
did
and all
not.
that.
He did not declare. He did not confer Bharat Ratna on Dr. Ambedkar.
Okay,
That was done by
so
the VP Singh government.
okay, okay. So we are seeing that they've been now we see even in the electoral results we see a large percentage of Dalits also voting for them. So do you think that this Hindutvaization of Dalits that has happened has also been because of the left wing not been able to or not willing to address the question of caste uh, heads on and not understanding the link between caste and class.
No, I don't. I think that would be an unfair comment to make. I don't think it's because of that. I mean, I think that the left may have done less than it should have done, or whatever you want to say, but that cannot be the primary reason. The primary reason is that as far as the masses of our Indian people are concerned, they are hugely religious. They are very influenced by religiosity to the extent that they did not even follow Dr. Ambedkar out of the Hindu fold. They are very much within the Hindu fold. And so, therefore, that makes them very susceptible and very vulnerable to the propaganda of the Sangh Parivar. And what Aijaz writes about, which is very interesting, is that the RSS has got innumerable frontal organizations. They have got frontal organizations for each subcaste among the Dalits also, which have created their histories, which have created all sorts of myths around their ancestors, and so on and so forth. So they have used a lot of effort and energy into drawing large sections of Dalits and OBCs into their Hindutva project. And that is what has to be fought. It, our challenge is to convince OBCs and Dalits that ultimately the Hindutva project is totally opposed to their development. It is actually going to take away all their rights. That is what has to be uh, part of our campaign.
Thank you, thank you. Next question. We have compiled a few questions from our WhatsApp groups. Next question is, I'll read it out for you. How do left parties envision the fight against fascism to unfold in the next few years? Given the state of affairs as they are, what are the strategies espoused by Indian Communist parties to combat fascism?
See, first of all, we do not believe that India is a fascist state. Let me make that very clear. We believe that there's a great threat because the ruling party is the frontal organization of a fascistic organization. It is being led by an organization that is committed to a very fascistic point of view. But that doesn't mean that we have already entered into a state of fascism. I'd like to make that very clear. Now, how we combat what is happening today, that would really require another whole discussion. This is not a question. This is actually a topic for a future discussion because this needs a lot of elucidation. But I did try to point out that unless the various aspects of the Hindutva project are understood and combated, that is actually the way to fight them. Is to understand its aspects and to take them on as far as each aspect is concerned. That means the commitment to economic liberalism and the commitment to increasing polarization so that they can try to unify the Hindu community behind them through their anti Muslim propaganda. And the third is the social project. So, all of these will have to be taken on board. Now, as far as strategy and tactics to fight them are concerned, this is a very huge topic. It includes electoral decisions, electoral campaigns, electoral tactics, and also trying to mobilize people, organizations, political parties on each one of these three aspects. Different people, different organizations, different groups will come in the fight against neoliberal policies. We can even think of the whole Kisan movement as being a movement, certainly a class movement against these policies. We can see the huge trade union activity of the last few years against their anti working class policies as part of this battle. So that aspect of their agenda will obviously need different kinds of struggles, different kinds of alliances, different kinds of fronts. The agenda, as far as communal polarization is concerned, will need certainly mobilization of political parties, secular forces, democratic organizations on these questions of, unity of people, how to forge unity, why unity is important, and why this propaganda against the minorities is false. It is not based on facts. All that will need different kinds of campaigns. And then the social agenda of the Sangh Parivar, that needs to be combated in another way by exposing the fact that they are Manuvadis. They are committed to Manusmriti, to imposition of Manusmriti. And what does that mean for 90% of those who consider themselves Hindus, who belong to the OBC class, who belong to the Dalit, who belong to the working classes and peasantry? Because Manusmriti says very clearly that all those who work, whether they are peasants or whether they are workers, they are also Shudras. They may have been born in other castes, but they are Shudras and they are to be treated as Shudras. So, different kinds of campaigns, different kinds of alliances, different kinds of approaches are needed to fight all these different aspects of their agenda.
Thank you, thank you. So
So
I
now
will
many
read
more
out.
questions have come, I noticed.
Yes, yes, yes. I will read out another question for you. Uh, I just recognized the revolutionary potential of literary and art forms. What are the goals that literature and cultural theater must serve at the present juncture? We are also seeing an extensive amount of Hindutva content being pushed into all sorts of media. How can we use media of art, theater, and literature for revolutionary ends?
Do you really think that I need to answer that question? I mean, these are things that we have to do out of our own experience. There are people involved in theater. There are lot of art form is being used in very progressive ways today. A lot of work is being done in trying to bring to life Adivasi culture, different kinds of Dalit cultures, different kinds of Adivasi and Dalit art forms. So there's a huge range of things that need to be done, to be written about also. It's not possible to just answer that question in a few words, you know. I mean, they, if you understand what they're trying to do, then that makes it easier to understand what we have to do. But it has to be for practitioners in those fields to come together to fight them and combat them.
Thank you, thank you. So before
But it's
taking,
becoming more and more difficult because democratic spaces are being reduced. The space for performances, the space for writing, the possibility of getting published, all this is being squeezed. So, new ways of reaching out to people have to be formed also. Social media is one very big arena which has to be used intelligently by those who are coming up with creative answers to their propaganda and their project. It has to be used more and more while we can still use it. Because even there we are seeing that all kinds of clamps are being put on expression. So they're coming down heavily on freedom of expression is something that makes all this difficult but not impossible. It has to be done. And we have to find ways of doing it. Now, in
thank you.
cinema, a lot of cinema, especially from the south, which has got a content, anti caste content, is also being viewed by millions of people. And I'm sure it's having its own effect. So, how can we promote that kind of cinema? How can we have more viewings of these kinds of films, these kinds of documentaries? How can we have readings of certain kinds of poetry, certain kinds of, and also can we look for material in our own traditional art and culture, which cannot be banned actually. That's why I keep saying reading Ambedkar is so important because they won't dare to ban Ambedkar. So reading Ambedkar and sharing Ambedkar is also very important.
Thank you, thank you. So before going to another question in the chat box, do anyone want to ask the question
There are
and
many questions in the
yes,
chat box, long
yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'll read the next
And I
one for
can't
you.
really see them now because the screen is saying that don't use up more space and things like that. So,
No worries, no worries. I'll
yeah.
read the question for you. Okay, so the next question. One of the factors that make Aijaz Ahmad so special is that, unlike many of his contemporaries, he was completely a homegrown intellectual, a product of Indian Public University. Perhaps this is also the reason why he could see through the fad of postmodernism so readily embraced by Western academy. Do you think postmodern line of thought is now popular in Indian academic spaces too? To what extent do postmodern tendencies excuse fascism?
You see, when we talk about Comrade Ejaz, I don't know how you can, I don't know how you call him a homegrown. What is the word homegrown intellectual?
Yeah,
Actually, the point about him is that he was so very uh, conversant with trends all over the world. He was born in India, he went to Pakistan, And over there, he was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to a very good sort of English medium school there. And where he came in, he got exposed to English literature. And then he went to college there. But basically, his education was of the most varied kind, and that was his reading. He read voraciously. If you go through this Nothing Human is Alien to Me, you will just see how he read and read and read. He is grounded in Urdu poetry. He has tried to dabble with Persian poetry too, the Urdu literature, Urdu prose, and then he uh, becomes fluent in English, and he then attacks the literature of the Western world. And then he, of course, as a Marxist, reads everything that there is to read, both in the classics and in all the different kinds of intellectual debates engaged in by Marxists of different kinds. So that was actually what made him uh, such a formidable fighter for Marxism, upholding Marxist traditions. Now, the second question you're asking me is postmodernism still very popular in academic circles and all that? Well, I'm not really part of any academic circle for a very, very long time, but from what I know and what I read, it is being deliberately promoted. You see, we don't think of intellectual uh, writing and publishing as production, but it is. It is also production. And universities and places of learning, they are also places, they are sites of intellectual production. And they are also controlled by very, very powerful corporate interests. And it is not the way in which I mean, even before the BJP started tinkering with syllabus, you all know that in recent years, after this development of postmodernism, etc., how difficult it is to get research fellowships, etc., in subjects which are not part of their agenda. It's very difficult. And the kind of people who are getting scholarships to go and study abroad, what they are being taught there and then being sent to other universities here and in the advanced capitalist countries, it's all a very, very important project, because the one thing that postmodernism and identity politics and all of that kind of thinking emphasize is the non existence of class. That is the one point that links all these schools of thought, is uh, uh, i- the complete deletion of the word class from academic discourse, and to put in its place many other kinds of communities, very, very small, very, very fragmented, but all promoting the idea that class actually no longer has any relevance and actually doesn't even exist. So, this is why postmodernism is promoted. This is why subaltern studies was promoted. It is promoted by financial and corporate interests also, which control universities. So we have to see these linkages, and in his books, in theory, these are very important points that Comrade Aijaz makes much more forcefully than I can hope to make them. So if you go through those writings, he will tell you how uh, intellectual production and publication, how that is also controlled and encouraged by class interest and corporate interests.
Thank you. So I'll go to the next question now. We have a question
No, but
collected from
other the people who are asking these questions, what are they thinking about these responses? I'm not getting any kind of feedback as to whether
Okay,
what I'm
so
saying is making any sense, or they're rejecting what I'm saying, or what it is.
so this the last two questions that were asked, that was we collected it over a group, so it came from multiple people. So I think they are listening. So I think maybe the next question, Brendan, you are here, no? Can you ask that question? The question that you
Yeah.
have asked, yeah.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, like I've noticed now, basically my first question has to do with Lenin's observation that fascism is capitalism in decay. And if you look at India, all right, we've noticed that a lot of the major uh, points in Indian society, like as in the Babri demolitions, came off the back of the economic crisis that preceded the LPG reforms, or like right now we are seeing this discourse on the Gyanmati Masjid and this comical petition on the Taj Mahal rooms that came off the back of a declining rupee and the food shortages. Like we've recently banned the exports of wheat. So I wanted to know what your take is on this. And my second question is,
No, I think that this is a very mechanical. I'm sorry, Brendan. I think that you're making very mechanical connections. I think that even if the rupee was not declining, the Gyan Vyapi controversy would be there. We should not be so mechanical. This has happened, so this is happening. And what Nilin said was in a certain time and a certain era, we have come a very long way from there. I don't say that capitalism has managed to overcome its inherent crises. I'm not saying that. But it has been able to overcome them much more than what people had thought at that time. And today, in fact, we are seeing almost a resurgent right wing, So we have to understand that the imperialism and capitalism have been able to uh, create a rightward shift and make real opposition to themselves and their policies less relevant in many of the advanced and developing countries. So I don't see that this is a one-to-one correlation, that this is happening and so this is happening. you know and I think that if we look at it like that, then what are we saying? If the rupee strengthens maybe tomorrow, so then Gyanvyapi will go off the agenda? No, it will not. So that agenda is a continuous agenda, which is not only to take people's minds off the economic problems that they are facing, but also to create this huge consent within the major part of Hindu society as to who is responsible for their problems. Not the capitalist class, not the government's policies, but the Muslim community.
yeah,
Am I
man,
making any
I
sense,
agree with
Brendan?
it makes a lot of sense. It's like as in the like as in the mechanical, like as in if this is happening, that is happening. Like it's a much more wider phenomenon. I would say I definitely agree with your understanding of this, and maybe I'll have to rethink the position. So yeah. And my second question is, will the rise of the BJP, all right, does it as in and the appropriation of the liberal democratic structure, as you have pointed out in your as you pointed out throughout the session, all right, does it like does it say that the structure itself is problematic, or can the structure be reformed in a way that
Yeah, you're right. That's a very important question. And Aijaz talks about that also. He says that, of course, the structures themselves are capable of being taken over in this sense, because the the forces that created these structures were themselves very ambivalent. They were not socialist forces. They were forces which contained within themselves capitalist elements, regressive elements, and liberal democratic people, and also extremely uh, socially conservative elements. So the structures that have been created and the people who man those structures also have all these ambiguities and weaknesses. That is why it has been possible to take them over. I mean, if the Supreme Court was peopled by judges who were completely and totally secular and completely and totally committed to upholding the Constitution, not amenable to any kind of influence of any kind, then you wouldn't have this takeover so easily. I think I'm just discussing with you now. These are things I've not thought out too much, but this is what I'm feeling. And also the fact that the major political parties also have found it, first of all, so easy to completely be a part of the neoliberal uh, regime, and therefore to also themselves shift rightwards, which means that their commitment to secularism and all other things also become tremendously weakened. So I think that this is certainly part of the problem, and this is what is making it possible for the BJP and the RSS to take over these structures.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Like, I will say that I read like a very interesting observation made in an article. I cannot remember the article, the specific article, but basically there's this understanding of Ambedkar, like as in Ambedkar was very upset with the way many provisions of the constitution turned out, especially the reservation constitution, because in his eyes it was not enough. Like there was a quote which I cannot I attended like a interesting talk like a couple of years ago where like he basically felt like it was like giving a man with polio a walking stick and expecting him to like function like a normal life, and a lot more is needed than just reservations. So but like I would agree with Comrade Ejaz's observation that the structure itself was created with certain interests in mind that were not radical, but instead like sought to just preserve like
They're
the
full of
existing.
compromises.
uh yes, ma'am, thank you.
You see, as far as reservation is concerned, Dr. Ambedkar had many, many views on reservation. In fact, towards the end of his life, he was very upset with those people who had benefited from reservation but were not interested in emancipation of Dalits anymore. And he spoke very bitterly about it. But that's not what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing upon the fact that the Constitution certainly is worth fighting for, certainly is worth defending. That we should not give up at all. And we have to say that we are for the Constitution and not for Manusmriti. But we have to also understand that it is in the nature of the it is a it is a constitution brought into existence by a capitalist class, and that itself means that uh, it can be used to further their interests much more in given situations than other classes, is what I'm trying to say. It's a complex thing.
All right, thank you
Brendan,
so
are you
much.
listening?
Yeah, I'm here. I completely get your point because, like, as it is, the preamble does like state what, like, an idealistic vision of what.
Yeah, you
Uh,
see the contradictions in those directive principles. Suddenly, cow protection comes in. Suddenly, something else comes in. There'll be exactly. I mean, the greatest example that I always comes to my mind is that prohibition and excise policy go together. As things to be achieved. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Brendan. So now we will, I'll read a question from Sandra. We already have a left front government in Kerala, and the left front still fights elections to come to power in places like Bengal and Tripura. To what extent can we rely on the left front governments in the fight against fascism?
What is the last part of the question?
To what extent can we rely on left front governments in the fight against fascism?
Who has asked this question?
Sandra.
Okay. Well, I don't understand where this question is coming from actually, because I am not seeing in the immediate future that there will be left front governments in Bengal and in Tripura. It's a big fight back. But I'm confused about the question itself. To what extent means what am I supposed to say? To what extent can you, who else can you rely on other than the left? Is there any other political grouping that is completely uh, committed to a policy of no compromise with Hindutva in all fields? I don't think there is. I mean, if we see the DMK government in Tamil Nadu, there are lots of things to support in that government. But it's also the state where we have atrocious atrocities against Dalits committed by OBC groups which are supporting this government and which the government supports. So, I'm just saying, in